Hey everyone, this is David Brown. I'm the 2021 Hawk Counter at the Braddock Bay Hawk Watch in Rochester, New York. Today is March 31st, so I thought I would talk about the March totals and how they compare to previous seasons. Here we have the monthly totals on hawkcount.org, and this will give us an idea of the general flow of the month. You see the month starts out pretty slow, March being the first month of the season. There's a lot of days that we're lucky if we get anything at all. A couple days early on with decent winds, you start to get a few dozen birds. And then as you get more into the second and third week, you're starting to get a couple hundred birds on the better days. And then towards the end of the month, we get a couple of days with thousands of birds as the turkey vulture numbers start to increase. So you can see yesterday we had the biggest day of the season, March 30th, 2,287 total migrants, with 1,980 of those being turkey vultures. Hawk Count has a cool feature where we can compare to the previous March totals, or we can compare to the previous spring seasons. So here we're looking at the March totals for all past years. So we have the current year, 2021, on top with all the totals, but we can also see how that compares to previous years, going back all the way to 1977. So what I'm going to do is take a look at this March versus the average of the previous 10 Marches. So 2011 through 2020, take the average total of March of those seasons and see how each individual species compares this year versus that average. So here's today's report, and I actually included those comparisons and I expressed them as a percentage. So if it was 100%, that would mean that this year's total was exactly equal to the average of the previous 10 Marches. If it was 50%, that would mean this year's total was half of the average. If it was 200%, that would mean it was twice the average. So if we just quickly go through the different species, we had no black vultures in March this year. The average is only 2.5. So some years we get them and some years we don't. But we normally get at least a few every season. Turkey vultures were above average, 131% of the average. And that's mostly due to just the couple of big days we had at the end of the season. With turkey vultures, the peak sometimes comes at the end of March, but it's usually at the beginning of April. Now, last year, 2020, the peak happened in March, so the March turkey vulture total was high, and then the April vulture total was lower. So sometimes it just depends on when you get the favorable winds, whether it's at the end of March or the beginning of April. Osprey numbers were below average, but there's so few that come through in March. We had 2, and the average is 2.6. So if we had had one more, we'd be happy that it was above average. So don't read into that too much. One that I really want to focus on is bald eagles, 333% of the average, more than 3 times the average. And the one question that everyone knows I hate to answer at the Hawk Watch is, how do you know you're not counting the same birds over and over? And I think that's something to consider when we look at something like bald eagles, because you do sometimes get bald eagles that are hanging around the bay. But really this year, I didn't notice that too much. In previous seasons, when the bay still had ice on it, we would see some young bald eagles hanging out and going to the ponds and back. But this season, if we go and we look at when we actually got bald eagles, let me just scroll up here. We can see that a lot of days I was only reporting 1 or maybe 2, but the real big numbers came on the days of big migration. So the high day was 45 on March 11th, but you can see we had some other days, 19, 16, 12. So the bulk of the bald eagles came on those really strong migration days when you're getting bald eagles that are up high and clearly migrating. So in this case, I don't think we have to worry that we were double counting. I think it's just a sign of how many bald eagles there are and how much they've increased even just in the past 10 years. Northern harriers were almost twice the average, and sharp-shinned hawks were more than twice the average, and Cooper's hawks were also above average. Those, I think, were, again, just we had some really good migration days here at the end of the month, and we'll see how things continue into April, which is the peak for all of those species. So I wouldn't read it too much into the fact that those numbers are high for March. We'll have to see how the rest of the season goes before we'll get the total picture for those. Now, for northern goshawks, the third accipiter, we had 0, which has only happened twice before, that there haven't been any in March, and that's just a sign of how much goshawk numbers have been decreasing. So we get a few every season. I think last year we only had 4, so the numbers are real small now, and hopefully we get some, but we had none in March, which is a little disappointing. You can see the average is only 2, though. Moving on to buteos. Red-shouldered hawks were just about average, a little lower, 96%. Red tails were up 160%, and again, mostly just from those big migration days. Rough-legged hawks, nearly double the average. We definitely noticed that it was a big spring for rough-legged hawks. Some fall hawk watches had big rough-leg numbers, so there's no surprise that they're coming back north in good numbers. Golden eagles, we had twice the average. We had 12. The average is 6. So good to see a lot of golden eagles, and we had some excellent looks at a few of them. Moving on to the falcons, kestrels were just about average. Merlins were a bit above average, 143%, and peregrines, 156%. And the numbers of those we get are relatively small again, so differences of 1 and 2 here and there can really make a big difference. But good to see that the falcon numbers are strong this year. And if we compare the total of everything to the previous averages, we were above average overall, 136% of the average. Okay, we are now officially 1/3 of the way done with the Hawk Watch, and let's hope for a good flight to continue into April and May. I know last year the weather was pretty lousy in April. We constantly had northeast winds and lake breeze, and a lot of the migrants went around us. So last year, actually, the March totals and the May totals were very high, and April was pretty forgettable. But it should really only be maybe a week and a half until we'll start seeing some broad-winged hawks. I'd say probably in the next week, whenever we have the next good southwest winds, we'll probably get another really big turkey vulture flight. And there's a lot of birds to come, a lot of accipiters in April and harriers, and of course we continue to see things like rough-legged hawks and golden eagles as well. Hopefully we get some goshawks, and week by week we see more and more songbirds and just birds in general showing up. So even when the hawks aren't flying, it gives us more species to watch so we don't get bored. And the weather gets warmer too, although yesterday was extremely warm, and now the temperature is just going down for the next few days. So time to dig out the snow shovel and put the heavy winter coat back on. But looking forward to the next 2 months, and we'll be at the Hawk Watch every day until the end of May. So thank you all for watching, and come out and visit us at the Braddock Bay Hawk Watch in Rochester, New York.